The world in 250 million years. Obviously, in 250 million years, continents will collide, forming a new Pangea, as well as new mountains will form, and the Atlantic Ocean will be a sea. A very tiny sea at that. It's almost unrecognizable. Antarctica will also be green again, not like the white that we have it. Antarctica is just looking a whole lot more full in that picture in general. Without all the ice, it's actually just a bunch of little islands, kind of. Interesting that the Indian subcontinent will still remain intact with the Asian continent. Of course, those two lands smashing into each other gave us our largest mountain range. But in 250 million years, there's going to be way more mountains that are a lot larger than that. This new highest point will be where Africa collides with North America, somewhere I think in Georgia. If we have Chicago and New York right here, although I don't know what Los Angeles is doing so far up north. I like how South America still looks pretty recognizable. Wait, is that New Zealand? Oh man, Japan's no longer anime island. I don't think this map is showing us deserts. Where would be the biggest desert? Because the Sahara is right here. The United States of America, if the 49th parallel didn't exist. So remember, the 49th parallel is the imaginary line we decided with Canada that we would draw our borders separating our two countries. Although there are 2 points where we don't follow this, but for the most part, yes. So these are the United States borders drawn more by physical geography, I'm assuming. Typically speaking, you are supposed to kind of follow rivers and mountain ranges. That's how it's usually done, at least in Europe. They don't really like going with just straight lines over there. So you can actually physically see some of the water and mountains that we're now following in this new universe. I'm wondering also how much additional population this would therefore give Canada. Because also remember, 50% of Canadians live below this blue line. They've got some very strange population density maps, that's for sure. Now, to be fair, they're not going to pick up too many more people in North Dakota or these parts of Montana that have been shaved off. This would be the biggest new land they gain because they would take all of Seattle. And this is just from the city itself, so you could probably round up to 1 million by taking like half of Washington. Although this is assuming they just randomly take these borders right now in 2023. It's probably more likely that we decided way back in the day that these borders would be the thing. So maybe it wouldn't actually change Canada's population all that much anyways. Height of the biggest mountain in each country. So the lowest on the list in terms of meters is actually Lithuania. I like how you Google it and it's literally just a rock. I don't know if anyone's ever Googled this in their entire life. Man, just look at those glorious Lithuanian mountains. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we actually have Kazakhstan as the highest mountain in all of Europe. Finally, a map that recognizes Kazakhstan's true European origin. It's literally called Khan and it's over 7,000 meters high. Only problem is, even though Kazakhstan is classified as in Europe, this mountain range is actually very far from it. But I don't really know if this really counts. It's just interesting to see how elevations really rise the more east you go. Even though this really isn't showing you mountain ranges at all, it's just showing you like the highest peak. Even though Turkey is pretty mountainous, they got some other mountains over here in Iberia. Of course, there's the Alps. Norway is just like one giant mountain range country. But to my surprise, their biggest mountain isn't actually that large. Poland, which is a relatively flat country, has a bigger mountain than all of Norway. Really surprised to see that the lowlands ended up getting higher numbers than 500 meters. All of the lowlands actually beat all of the Baltic states. Guess they're not so low after all. Kind of surprising to see a smaller country with such a high mountain in it until you realize this small country is the nation of Switzerland. Then pretty much everything makes sense after that. Kind of surprised this isn't the Matterhorn. It is pretty tall, but I'm guessing the Matterhorn is just a lot more famous because of its recognizability. Denmark only scored this because they have all of Greenland, remember that. The states that play the most D&D. Now, I'm not exactly sure how this data was discovered, but it seems like the Deep South really aren't big fans still, which I guess shouldn't be surprising considering how much Dungeons & Dragons have been demonized over the decades. Although a certain television show has certainly helped change that as of recently. My home state of California is currently 46 on the list. I actually played D&D for the first time like a year ago. It's actually really fun. According to this, the top state is actually Utah. Utah? Mormons like D&D? I guess so. Interesting that number 2 and number 3 are surrounding states, Idaho and Oregon. This really seems like a northern state supremacy thing. All the southern states are not big fans. Even Alaska, the northernmost state in the entire US, it's ranked 4th here. And I guess it's because it's just so cold, like there's nothing else to do. Staying inside and playing sounds a lot better than getting frostbite. The worst state in the entire US is actually in New York. They are not fans at all. Yet right here next to them, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, really high up. I'm actually really surprised to see like the heart of the country really enjoys this game. I think the only thing I can really see in common is you have to have like maybe a foresty area. Maybe you'd be more into it if there was like a lot of forests. Although that's not necessarily the case for Utah. I think it just gets you in the mood or something. The percentage of population able to hold a conversation in German. Now, obviously, if you're in Germany, 95% or more of your population can have a German conversation. Same for Austria. I have always heard they are basically just mountain Germans. Not sure if I'm supposed to say that or not. Also heard memes that Dutch is just a dialect of German. 71% of people can hold a German conversation here. Again, I probably shouldn't say that either. Things get really low in the many Romance language countries, all less than 10%. I mean, France, you border Germany and you're only at 6, but there's probably a pretty big reason why you wouldn't want to speak German in this country anymore. It's also very high in Denmark and as well as Slovenia, which I guess they border Austria, so maybe not that crazy. A lot of the Baltic states, Finland and Sweden, pretty high. I mean, Sweden's at over a quarter. Like how Cyprus is down here in the corner at 2%. I wonder what exactly defines conversation though. Is me just saying Guten Tag enough? Here are the biggest companies in the world by country. So the biggest US company happens to be Apple, which shouldn't be a surprise to any of the investors out there. But the biggest Canadian company is Home Depot. When was Canada gonna inform me that Home Depot is a Canadian company? Is that why so many people like Lowe's so much more? Lowe's, not Lowe's. Oh, the Home Depot happens to be the biggest company in Canada, not the biggest Canadian company. I was gonna say, that was gonna blow my mind. For the UK, the #1 company is Shell. Of course, for Switzerland, everyone's favorite Nestle. I'm not surprised that I don't recognize many of these companies around the world. I mean, that's really shouldn't be shocking at all. The top company in the little island of Malta is the Malta International Airport. I mean, I guess that does make sense. Toyota is the top company of Japan, and of course, South Korea has Samsung. Doesn't Samsung basically like own all of South Korea? I'm not like that crazy, but like, don't they own like basically 20% of the entire country's GDP? I feel like a lot of these are banks or pretty much energy companies. That's exactly how this is broken down. If the country's in yellow, yes, it is energy. France actually has a retail company. Oh, Louis Vuitton. I was like, what is this? There's actually a lot of places that aren't even included on this list that I'm very curious about. I think we need more info. What percentage of population is vegetarian in India? So I've always heard many Indians are vegetarian, but it seems like the vast majority are coming from just a certain part of the country, although this area does have a large portion of the country's population as a whole. But surprisingly, vegetarianism is actually very low in a lot of the southern part near the peninsula. Well, I guess almost all of India is pretty much a peninsula. It's also very low on the borders of Bangladesh and Myanmar, although this is a nice outlier, 20%. So exactly 3 out of 4 Indians that live in this province are vegetarian. That is a crazy rate. For comparison, the US sits at only about 5% out of the entire population. The UK is double that, but I wonder how much of Indian population in the UK help increase this number. Of course, looking at a world map that compares all the countries, India is just destroying everyone. But what is going on in Mexico? I had no idea they were that high. I don't think they're at India levels, but man, they're getting pretty close to that dark blue. According to this, 19% of Mexicans are vegetarian. 23 million people. Just comparing daily meat consumption though, India is also extremely high up. A lot of their population is either vegetarian or just not consuming much meat in general. Someone posted this on Reddit and asked people to help date this map. Let's see how close we can get. First of all, the borders are set. We have the 49th parallel. Mexico is independent from Spain. That doesn't really narrow things down. I just wanted to say it out loud. However, this is labeled as the Dominion of Canada. So Canada's not completely independent just yet. They're still under that British rule. We also have the West Indies labeled out here in the Caribbean. Is it safe to assume Cuba is still under Spain then? I can't tell because it's a different color though. That's what's confusing. I don't think we can get many hints from Central America, although I do see that this is still British Honduras. Wait, British Honduras. That's supposed to be Belize, but okay. Is that what they called it back then? Oh, it was really called British Honduras. For some reason, I thought like even the British called it Belize. We also have another image that can help us out a little bit. There's a key at the bottom. The circled cities are cities with over 1 million population. Ones with triangles have population between 300,000 and 1 million. So LA is a triangle. They're over 1 million. Not that really, I don't know when LA crossed 1 million population. Not a single city in Florida with over 300,000 population. I think it's safe to say this is before WW2. I'm just gonna take a wild guess and say this is like the 1900s. I don't know, 1907, something random like that. I cannot tell if Cuba's independent. So this user completely broke it down for us. That's the first thing you notice too. The Caribbean has not gained its independence. Baja California has not been divided, so before 30th of December 1930. That's crazy. I wouldn't even have thought of that. This is not a state in Mexico, so February 5th maybe, before 1917. New Mexico and Arizona are states, so it's after February 1912. Well, my prediction's off. The guesstimate here is somewhere between 1927 and 1930. Well, I said it was before WW2. If I could have just read exactly what was going on with these islands, I think I could have done a lot better. Although I do see that there is a green outline over the US, and that same green outline looks like it's over the Puerto Rico. I don't know why. My initial thought was this is around the time of the Spanish-American War. That was a little bit too early. A two-map comparison. One, if countries' wealth were distributed equally equally versus if global wealth was distributed equally. So if just the country's wealth was distributed equally, an average person would have at least maybe 2 or 3 times more. Although some outliers, Russia, Germany, and actually the US would have at least 6 times more. But if instead you take the entirety of global wealth and distribute it equally, the numbers get way more insane. Then the US barely sees a 100% increase, and a lot of Western European countries as well as Canada actually sees a decrease. How does it decrease? Well, I know how it does, but I'm just surprised about that. Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, it would also decrease. On the other edge of things, Africa would be having a field day. The average citizen in Sudan would have 300 times more. I didn't even know these numbers were possible. Afghanistan would see the highest increase in Asia. They'd have 100 times more, although I really wish we had the data here for North Korea. The average Mexican citizen would have 7 times more, but that's still not the increase they would see in South America. Although Chile's doing pretty good. They're only at 2 to 4. Actually, their neighbor right next to them that would see an increase a lot. So if you're looking to just become wealthier in general, it really depends on what country of origin you're in. Then you can figure out if you want global wealth distribution or country wealth distribution. If you're from the US, you're probably arguing for the countrywide model. I guess if you're from Canada too, I mean, a 2% increase is better than decreasing your wealth, which is what would happen here. And big thank you to my patrons: Drew's Goth Girlfriend, Triv44, aka DrewcometoCracow, Polandnextvacation, Twickenhamster, Drew's Argentinian Grandpa, $20 is a lot, Drew, Selene, Wildfang, Bryton Is,
Carmel Saida,
DJ, McSkillet,
LuxembourgLover,
Patrick, Robert E,
RyeThePie,
the Polish of
the
Lithuanian
Mexican
Commonwealth,
760,
Veiotic,
and ZaneyBoi.